Today on the Locked On Hornets podcast, I'm going solo, and yes, we are going to talk draft, we are going to talk offseason, but I have to focus in on some final in-season thoughts as we had a recap. We had a weekend of action to recap. That's all ahead on today's episode of the Locked On Hornets podcast, because I'm a sicko!
You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
This is Locked On Hornets. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side. I need to unleash it, and I do with Monopoly Go. I'm a huge fan. The mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. I've lost friends over the game Monopoly Go, and I don't even want to name them here because it's too painful to even talk about. Okay, thanks for making Locked On Hornets your first listen every single day. We are free and daily wherever you get podcasts, including on YouTube. And we're a little late today. That's part my fault, part Walker's fault. I have a baby. Walker has a radio show. He was at Spectrum Center today for the exit interviews. Him and I are going to get back together tomorrow to talk about everything that was said in those exit interviews. I haven't even watched them yet. I'll be honest. I'm going to stop doing this show, and then I'm going to go start my focus on the offseason by watching those exit interviews. So we're going to get to all of that tomorrow. But I do have some final in-season thoughts that I want to get to, then kind of look ahead, talk about what's next, set the table, do a little table setting. We're not ready to eat yet. I know. I look at my Twitter mentions, and they say draft. Talk about the draft. Talk about the draft. I will mention the draft today. We'll talk about the draft. But we're still table setting for a second. It's going to be fun table setting, but we're still table setting for a second. I'm Doug Branson. You can follow me on Twitter at Doug Branson LOH if you want to do that. some real sicko thoughts there, folks. And on my subtext, join subtext.com/Locked On Hornets. And most importantly, on my Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com, where I have full thoughts on the final two games of the season for the Charlotte Hornets. That's right, folks. I watched every single game. When I was tooling around with branding for Every Hornets Box Score, I was thinking of the sort of subtitle for it to be Every Hornets Box Score. I watch every Hornets game so that you don't have to. Because that's how, look, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be sad. I don't want to be cynical. I want to be a sicko. I enjoy being a sicko. I enjoy the idea that I did watch all 82 games. But it's been tough these past two seasons. That's just being honest. That's not even being cynical. That's being honest that these two seasons have been extremely difficult because of what could have been. I got to save it for the second segment, or really the third segment when I look back on this season. But that's been the most painful part. But let's talk about what happened over the weekend. A loss to the Boston Celtics, a rout. I saw on Twitter someone said that there were 235 wins this season, or games decided by 20 points or more this season, and that's some kind of record high. And so then my curiosity got the best of me, and I thought, how many of those were the Hornets a part of? And the answer is, by my count, 19, which would represent 8% of the, if you want to call it a blowout, 20 or more points. The Hornets were a part of those this season. That's a lot. And one of those was against the Boston Celtics over the weekend, where you sort of had this, like, Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges played the first half, and then they didn't play the second half, and they were sort of stuck in this liminal state of, are we ready to completely pack it in? And I think you saw against Cleveland, when they get a win to end the season, 120-110, a double-digit win against a Cleveland Cavaliers team that did have something to play for, that you saw, I think, maybe the mistake there against Boston was even playing Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges. Because what happens when you do that is all of those reserves then have to sort of cede a little bit of ground to those players, both out of respect and out of the fact that they're the most talented players on the floor. But it mucked up the offense because Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller, they've got nothing to play for. So everybody seemed to be in, chuck up some shots, get some final looks in before the season's over. So once they dispensed with all of that and they just played reserves, then it was against Cleveland. It was more about ball movement. It was more about sharing the ball. It was more about getting up and down the floor quickly. And you just saw more effort across the board when it was just like, all right, sort of return to Summer League. Everybody audition, whether it's for your next team or for the Hornets, everybody is in audition mode. And just like against Atlanta a few nights ago, the Hornets reserves were able to catch an Eastern Conference team that did have something to play for, but decided not to play for it, caught them off guard. 28-7 run in the fourth quarter by the Hornets to take a double-digit deficit in the fourth quarter into what ended up being a double-digit win. And the players to highlight here, I'll start with Nick Smith Jr., 24 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists on 45% shooting, but the real number is 14 of those 24 points coming in the fourth quarter. When he was locked in on getting to the rim or catch and shoot, he looked great. When he does this sort of step-back three stuff, just not like he's pushing the limits of his offensive ability. But, man, I mean, when he's got the shot making going, it is super impressive to watch. And the big question for Nick Smith Jr. as we look ahead will be, what can he add to his game, whether it's playmaking or whether it's defense? What can he add? What other signature can he add to his game? Because if he doesn't add something else, then the shot making has to be Lou Williams level elite. Lou Williams was an asset to the teams that he was an asset for, although he moved around a lot. Not a lot of teams decided, hey, let's keep Lou around for, 7-8 seasons. But he was an asset because his shot making was elite. And so you got over the fact that there were these issues. I'm not sure that Nick Smith Jr. is going to get there. Maybe he does. We got a long road ahead for him. But it'll be interesting to see what he does over the offseason. The real player to talk about, and one that I'm excited to talk about, is JT Thor. More Thor. The last breath of More Thor is a mighty roar. 41 minutes played, career high 20 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists on 8 of 11 shooting, 2 steals and 3 blocks. I love this. I think against Atlanta, I made the tweet joke of, this is like when you're dying of hypothermia and you get that warm feeling. It's just like one more little. Well, JT Thor, same way. I mean, his career was completely in the ICU, on life support with the Hornets anyway, and he gives you this one. Now, I want to celebrate this. Part of me is a little upset, honestly, because, look, we had to shut down the HQ, the More Thor Movement HQ. I was president. We had we had to fire all the staff. We had to lay them all off. They all had to go on unemployment. The movement died. And then to get this is almost like, what? Why now? Why not any other point in which you got an opportunity to play? And, unfortunately, a lot of times I think the answer to that question is the question itself, which is why now? Well, now because, it takes time. You're improving. I mean, hopefully JT Thor can take this into the offseason again, whether it's for the Hornets or he finds another team, and can continue to progress and give teams a reason to give him another look, because I think he does possess a lot of tools that you saw. I mean, he was moving through contact. He was on both ends of the floor, I think, getting the best of Evan Mobley. Like, what's going on there? I wrote this in my notes. Like, if JT Thor is going to back you down and knock down a bucket in the lane, I'm sorry, Evan Mobley. Like, you're not a star. Not a star in this league. Like, yeah, I don't know what Cleveland fans do with that. But JT Thor, really impressive game. The part that bothers me, unfortunately, is that I hear the thing that Steve Clifford said last offseason, or, well, really, it was either after the last game or during the exit interviews, where he said teams get in trouble all the time because they look at players and their performances when games don't matter, when the best players aren't playing at the end of the season in some of these games, and you look at those performances and you get tricked and you think, well, that's who that player can be. You really have to put the microscope on how did they perform when they were going up against the best, even the best reserves from the other team. Because, I mean, a lot of the action here was against not Cleveland or Boston or Atlanta's B team. It was sort of their BC team. So that's in the back of my head too. Like, I can't get that out of my head. How much stock do you really put into those numbers? It's always a difficult thing. But the Hornets do end the season on a win. And some people weren't happy about that because the result of it is you win 21 games, Portland wins 21 games. Now instead of being in sole possession of the third best, which really is the first best odds, if you're the third worst team in the NBA, you get the first best odds because the 1, 2, and 3 get the same odds at the number 1 overall pick, 14%. So now they're in a tiebreaker situation. If they lose the tiebreaker, they will have worse odds. And I have some thoughts on that we'll get to coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
You've been dying for it. Off-season talk. You've been wanting us to talk about it. Really, for weeks, you've been wanting us to talk about the draft. And we are sickos, and we still watch the games, and we wanted to talk about those instead. But now I will shift some focus onto the offseason, talk about what's next, set the table, give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. That's all ahead on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Listen, just buying tickets to sporting events can be frustrating, right? I mean, you don't know if the tickets are any good. You don't know if there's an obstruction sometimes, or, what your seat view is, or, it's just a frustrating process. But now, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And those are baseball more than any other sport. The obstructions, my goodness, you get stuck behind a pillar. Okay, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can get your last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And the seat views. I'm telling you, I keep harping on it, but you don't want to buy a ticket, and sometimes it's an expensive ticket, especially if you're taking your family. And then you end up getting the seats that you can't see anything. It's the worst. So seat views, you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know before you go. All right, so take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. You heard me talk about Monopoly Go up top. I've been told by my family, my friends that aren't my friends anymore, that I'm a competitive person. And you know what? It's true. Okay? I have a competitive side. We all do. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it's called Monopoly. You've definitely heard of that. It's a great twist on that game, Monopoly, where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is, messing with my friends, getting one over on those folks. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game, join your friends, download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Hornets podcast, out of the first segment, I mentioned those pesky odds and the fact that the Hornets are now set to have a tiebreaker with the Portland Trail Blazers because both of those teams won 21 games apiece. One will get the third best odds, which are really the first best odds at 14%, and the other team will get 12-ish%. So we're talking about a 2% drop heading into the draft. And look, if this draft featured a LeBron James level player, if it featured a Wembanyama level player, hell, if it featured a Jason Tatum level player, where it was a guy similar to Brandon Miller, where it's like, well, he's got to put a few things together, but man, you can really see that there's potential there. I'm not sure that guy exists in this draft as I take a look at what the experts that pay attention to this thing super closely. I'm just starting my draft research, but it doesn't appear that guy's sitting and waiting. It's like if you take any of these players at the top of the draft, there are big question marks. And so, if you're talking about 2%, I'm not all that concerned about it. Also, what did you want the Charlotte Hornets to do? I mean, final game of the season, you go up against Cleveland. Cleveland actually has something to play for. They could have gotten the 2 seed. I don't know how it all shook out, but they had the potential going into that day to get the 2 seed, and they didn't take advantage of it. I don't know what that says about the NBA. Nobody seems to care about seeding anymore. It's all about having your best players. Home court does not seem to be a focus for teams anymore. It's all about keeping your best players healthy so that you go into that game, even if you have to play more road games, even if you have to play better teams. Teams are just more apt to say, nope, we just want the full complement of players, and we're going to do whatever that means, even if it means not giving ourselves the opportunity at the best seed. And so you had Cleveland and Atlanta before them play the Hornets, fall asleep, and the Hornets took advantage against Cleveland. It was a 28-7 run in the fourth quarter. It was Nick Smith jumping all over him. It was JT Thor making a big block to help seal the victory. And the Hornets get the win. And so I don't know what you wanted them to do, though. I mean, not play? Like, that was they were just short of that, just short of forfeiting. I mean, the Hornets were playing all of their deep reserves, including Amari Bailey. We saw more of Amari Bailey in that game than we've really seen from him all season long. So I don't really know what there is to be upset about. I think that for some of those players, it's a good confidence booster to go into the summer with a victory and to put up some big numbers like that. So let's talk about what's next. What's most important for this team to focus on? Is it the draft? Is it this new head coaching position, which they got to jump on because Steve Clifford decided to announce his decision early? So now they've gotten a jump on some of these interviews, but you've seen now that the interview process is running up against Brooklyn's interview process. Brooklyn interviewing Jordi Fernandez. They're also interviewing Budenholzer, which is interesting because we haven't heard that name with the Charlotte Hornets, even though it makes a lot of sense, you would think, because Budenholzer has ties with Schnall. He has Rick Schnall, one of the owners, who used to be part of the ownership group in Atlanta. He has ties with, or at least was around the organization at the same time that Jeff Peterson was. So that makes sense, but they seem to be really focused on the hot shot assistant. But they're also expanding that search daily. I mean, they are interviewing a lot of folks, and new names are popping up almost on the daily. And so it makes you wonder, are they going to be able to close the deal? Like, I hate to be that guy. I hate to be the nervous Nelly, but, I'm still stung by Kenny Atkinson. And it goes to this thing that I've talked about several times on the show. There is, despite the fact that this team has new owners, it has a new general manager or EVP of basketball operation, it's going to have a new coach. It has a new potential superstar in Brandon Miller. It has all of these new things. And yet, when I talk to the fan base, there is institutional trauma that is going to have to be overcome. Because I look at this coaching situation and I see all of these names, and they all have great traits, and people talk really highly of them, and the Hornets seem to be doing their due diligence. And that's a very generous way to look at the fact that they haven't seemed to hone in on anyone yet. And they have it, and they continue to expand the search. The generous thing to say would be, well, the Hornets are just making sure they're going to interview everyone, even Jay Larinaga, excuse me. Even Jay Larinaga. They are interviewing everyone. But the other way to look at that is, are they going to be able to seal the deal? Are they expanding the search in a just-in-case measure, or because the guy that they want or the person that they want, because they're also interviewing – I think they're interviewing Lindsey Harding, but they may interview Don Staley as well. The person that they want, can they get that person? Because they didn't get Kenny Atkinson. They got an agreement, but they didn't get him to put pen to paper. So that's going to be something that I'm really hyper-focused on until they make that call. And I think you would want to make that call and get that in writing sooner rather than later. This team has had a history of waiting. And I really hope that you certainly don't want an organization to get out ahead of themselves, but you want them to be decisive. You want them not to wait so long that they miss opportunities. And so hopefully this isn't a case of a hot shot assistant comes in or hot shot coaching opportunity comes in, looks at the situation, looks at the offer, if an offer is made, and says, I heard things from Kenny Atkinson, and now I can't. You hope that's not a thing. But that's not the only thing that they have to look at as well. They've got a high draft pick. We don't know exactly what it's going to be yet. We won't know that until May. But you do know, and so you're scouting Jeff Peterson and the scouting regime there. They're going to be on high alert to figure out, everybody I think is, when you have a draft that is as weak as this one is up top and really throughout, I think everyone's going to they're going to rack their brain to see if they can figure out one thing from one player that they hook on and say, all right, I think people are missing this thing on this player. So that work is being done now, but then you've got this big decision on Miles Bridges. Do you bring him back? And how much is it going to cost you to bring him back? What other now, Miles Bridges has done a lot of talking about how much he loves Charlotte, loves the franchise, loves Steve Clifford. Steve Clifford's still going to be around. I imagine Steve Clifford would advocate for Miles Bridges' return. But that talk is great talk when you're in the middle of the season. I remember when Miles Bridges was negotiating with the Charlotte Hornets with Mitch Kupchak, coming off of those felony domestic violence charges, and there was some hardball being played with what they wanted, and it resulted not in a deal, even a short-term deal, even a one-year deal. It resulted in a qualifying offer getting picked up, which is, again, these were rare circumstances, but that's rare that happens. So will hardball be played again? And will another team decide to take advantage of that, whether it be Detroit, Indiana, or whatever? There's going to be a team that gets scooped in the first round of the playoffs that thinks, if we just had that one extra piece, we would have been more competitive. And they're going to talk themselves into making an offer for Miles Bridges, I think. So will the Hornets be able to match that? And a lot of that, I think, is going to revolve around how ready the Hornets think they are to compete or will be able to compete in the next few years. Because if they're super confident, then you make the hardest run you can at Miles Bridges. If they're not as confident, then you open yourself up to other possibilities if you don't give a huge chunk of change to Miles Bridges. There's other questions too, though. What happens to the trade brigade? And I'm not here to answer. I'm here to ask questions to set the table. I'm not here to answer these questions because I think there's a lot to talk about, and I want to talk about some of this with Walker and break these players down. But you brought in a lot of personnel at the trade deadline. You let a lot of it go too, but you brought a lot in. Davis Bertans, do you rework that deal and add his three-point shooting knowing that he's a defensive liability? But he can get a shot anywhere on the floor. I mean, that's the thing that impresses you most about Davis is that all he needs is a direct handoff, and he can literally get a shot up clean anywhere. That is, whatever you think about his defense, whatever you think about his athleticism, that's a skill. Now, that skill was probably exposed because he was being played a lot more minutes than you may want to play Davis. But you certainly can't pay Davis what he's making now, so you got to figure that out. But also decisions on Trey Mann and on players that need options picked up or need contracts, but also you've got some players that might be attractive on the trade market if you want to combine them with picks like Vasa Micic, if you don't see them as a part of your future organization or you see them as opportunities to go out and pick up better talent. Because, look, I mean, bottom line, this team is not talented enough. Yes, this season was about injuries, but this team is not talented enough to compete in the Eastern Conference. They have holes everywhere. And size, physicality, toughness, they've been issues for the past couple of years. They continue to be an issue here. And again, I am separating this from the injuries because I think even when this team was at full strength, we were starting to ask and starting to answer questions. I'm not sure we were totally comfortable with the answers, and then the injuries hit, and then you go, okay, well, you throw your hands up and say, well, we didn't really have a full opportunity to explore the answer to that question. A lot more. What will LaMelo do to convince the organization and fans that he can stay healthy? And I'll be on Brandon Miller Muscle Watch all offseason long. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Branson LOH because I'm going to be posting pictures of that guy anytime he gets in front of a camera. and we're going to watch those muscles grow together. Okay, coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Okay, I just spent some time looking ahead. Now I want to hop in the time machine. I want to go back to the beginning of this season and look at what this season was really about. And I'm not going to use the word injuries because that's too easy. I want to tell you what this season was really about. That's coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. You can get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. Prize Picks has something for every sports fan, from basketball and hockey, even to League of Legends, if that's your thing. Everything in between. You can pick LeBron, Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, Jude Bellingham, all in the same entry. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this basketball season. I love Prize Picks. I know you will too. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONNBA, all one word. Smush it together. Download the app today. Get a first deposit match up to $100. That's Prize Picks. Do it. Final segment here on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Walker will rejoin me. We're also going to talk to David Walker later on this week and Nada Edwards. We're getting the family back together to really relive what this season was. And looking back, this season was difficult. I'm going to give it to you straight. This was hard because we came out of that injury-riddled season 2 seasons ago, and we went through the summer that we went through with Miles Bridges and all of the news around that, and it was difficult to look at whatever side of that you were on. It was difficult because the Hornets were really going through it as an organization, and a lot of that I think was self-inflicted. But there's no doubt that they have been a hard luck franchise. And looking back on this season, I would say that, yes, obviously it's about injuries. Like, they've been towards the bottom of the league 2 seasons now in games missed and player injuries. And, some of those injuries were freak injuries. Like, I think they should reevaluate every aspect of this franchise, including the training staff. But I'm also not somebody that comes out and immediately says, fire the training staff. They're all rotten. Like, I don't think that's necessarily the case. This is a combination of things. But I don't even think, when it really comes down to it, that that's what this season was about. I think this season really was about the franchise finally, mercifully, slowly coming to terms with the failure of the previous regime's rebuild. And it was also about that previous regime finally letting go for the good of the franchise. Michael Jordan brought a lot of great things to the city of Charlotte as owner of the Charlotte Hornets. And he attempted, in the ways that he attempted, to bring winning basketball to Charlotte. It didn't work. He failed. There's no way around that. But the true failure would have been to hang on even though you don't really care about it anymore. And we see that in sports all the time. People hold on to their franchise because they're like family heirlooms, and franchises wither on the vine as ownership gets super cheap and stops caring about putting a winning product on the floor. And there's no way out. There's no way out because that family owns it, and there's no way out. At least Michael Jordan decided, hey, and I'm obviously speculating a little bit here, but what it seemed like to me was that the losing was difficult for him. His attention seemed to be in other places. He wasn't as actively involved with the media. He stayed active in the city, but he wasn't as activated with the media and out front and center saying, here's how I'm going to win basketball games for the city of Charlotte. Seemed like he was more interested in the race team. So he finally gives up and says, all right, let's find a group that can actually go and care about this franchise the way the franchise deserves to be cared about. You and I and the sickos that pay money to go to Spectrum Center and pay money to Bally's or League Pass or whatever we got to do to watch this godforsaken team, hard luck team, we deserve better. We deserve an ownership group that tries. And maybe this ownership group will fail too. But at least for however long, 5, 10 years, we'll get to see them try. There is a joy in that. There is a joy in watching people try, even if they end up failing. So that is really, to me, what this season is about. As you saw and this version of the franchise is not a clean break. It's not saying we're going to wash everything that happened. It is slow. Mitch Kupchak is still hanging around this organization. Clifford is. Jordan still owns a piece of this team. I saw his brother Larry Jordan on the sidelines for the game that I went to against OKC. There are remnants of the previous organization here. But hopefully there will be some new thought, some creativity, some youth. You're already seeing that with Jeff Peterson being the hire of EVP of basketball operations. I think you're going to see it with the coaching hire too. You're going to see youth. You're going to see creativity. You're going to see new renovations to the arena. You're going to see a new practice facility. Hopefully over the next 5 years, this team is totally transformed, both from a roster perspective, hopefully one that's built around your top two talent in LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, but also just really from the inside out. And 5 years from now, I hope we're talking about the Summer League scuttlebutt being that the Hornets as an organization have turned the perception around. Because there was not a doubt in anyone's mind that the perception of this organization over the past, 10 years, even when they were going to the playoffs in 15-16, was cheap, don't know what they're doing, fundamentally flawed, and going nowhere. Making the playoffs is not going to change that. Even if you win a playoff series, it's not going to change that. A lot has to go into rebuilding your image so that you can attract free agent talent, so you can convince players that you trade for to stay. So hopefully all of that is happening behind the scenes, but that's to me what this season was about. The trade of Gordon Hayward, of Terry Rozier. This team for the past few seasons have been holding on to an idea that they were building a sustainable winner. They were building something that was sustainable, but it wasn't winning. Even when it was healthy, it wasn't winning playoff series. It wasn't even getting to playoff series. I hope at some point that there is an expectation setting. We haven't really seen that from this new org, from this new structure, from Jeff Peterson, any of the new hires. We'll see what the head coach says when they hire this person. But I've heard a lot of sustainability. I've heard a lot of slow and steady. At some point, somebody has to come in and say, "Nah, we're trying to win in the playoffs. We're trying to build excellence. We're trying to be the number one team in the NBA. Here's how we're going to do it." Still waiting on that sort of to happen. And that's, to me, what this season has been about, the starting of that process. So even though this season has been extremely difficult, the past two seasons have, hopefully they can start to put a lot of this behind them this offseason and make moves to start to make that process happen. I'm going to remain hopeful because I have no choice, because I'm a sicko, because I want this team to I want them to reclaim. I'll even take the glory that they had in the years where they never even made an Eastern Conference Finals. I'll even take some of that. Give me some of that. So we'll see. And I want to see fans back in the building too. But I'm not putting that on fans. I'm putting that on the organization. Okay, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Hornets. You've heard enough of my rambling. You'll hear more of it tomorrow, but it'll be alongside Walker Mail. We'll talk about all that we heard from the exit interviews. Thanks so much for tuning in all season long. We've got a ton planned for this offseason, draft coverage, the whole thing, and I can't wait to get into it with you. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching on YouTube. Subscribe there, like the videos, and until next time, go Hornets, go America, let's swarm Charlotte.